schedule release must have dropped. And look, we knew the opponents ahead of time. So when this schedule did release, I feel like it actually is the best outcome for how these games could have lined up. This schedule features Utah plays 9 conference games, right? 8 of them come against teams that finished inside the top 10 of the Big 12 a season ago. So of the bottom 5, because Utah's in there too, you only get 1 of them. So that's not favorable, but 5 conference games at home, only 4 on the road, no back-to-back road games, and buys before you play Arizona State and travel to Waco. So for as far as how this schedule could shake out, I feel like it's actually pretty favorable, and that's why I feel like it puts Utah in the best position they could be in to bounce back and win the conference in 25, Spencer.
Well, I'm glad you added that stipulation in there, because I was wondering if we were looking at the same schedule, man. This is brutal. This is welcome to the new conference. We don't want you to win it. You stunk in the first year, and we want you to stay down as long as you can. Like, this feels deliberate from Brett Yormark and company to have their opponents line up like this, because I'm with you. The ordering makes it more tenable. You don't have consecutive conference road games, even factoring in buys. It doesn't exist. So that's the good news, is you'll never have to be away from Rice-Eccles Stadium for more than 1 week. But I tell you what, man, there are a lot of Big 12 schedules that work out in your favor more than this one does, because the caliber opponents, to have not just the defending champs in Arizona State, and of course BYU is going to be in there, but to also have Texas Tech and both Kansas schools. Now, the good news is, of those 3 opponents, 2 of them are at home. That's great. But to have to go through them all, this is as much of a gauntlet of a Big 12 schedule as you can find. And I fully do not agree with what you said in the cold open of this segment, which is it puts them in position to win the Big 12. I think it does the exact opposite, because it's not like you can coast to the finish with 2 of your last 3 on the road, one of which is on a short week, by the way. Potentially, there's a flex option, it appears, for that Kansas game on either November 28th or November 29th, a Friday or a Saturday. So you could be playing in Lawrence on a short week after playing Kansas State at home, and the week before that at Baylor, that had a great finish to the end of last season. I'm not picking Utah to get to the Big 12 championship game with this schedule until they show me something, man. There's so much that has to change. I know, new OC, Dampier at quarterback, that's great. That's all good and fine. But you got to show me something for this schedule, and Utah right now has shown me they missed a bowl game.
Yeah, it's rough in terms of the lack of the draw. I already brought up. I mean, you miss 5 of the bottom teams in the conference. You only get 1 of that 5. Like, that's where it's unfortunate. You only get Cincinnati in that, and that I feel like is Utah's probably easiest Big 12 game. But like, you could argue from there, like maybe the second easiest is like the West Virginia Colorado game. But you still have to make that trip all the way out to West Virginia. Like that's tough. It's a haul to have to go out there for Utah. And yes, I will say the one thing I like about the schedule, at least, is, Kansas State, Baylor, and Kansas, you play them all towards the end of the schedule, where I feel like Utah should be playing their best ball, that by then Dampier settling and all things like that. Now, like we mentioned, you don't start easy, because you get Texas Tech right away too, but because of the quality of the games too that Utah gets at home, that's what leaves me excited. I don't have to go to Provo this year, but that game, it just feels like in this rivalry, it is one where you can, as the cliche says, throw out the records. It's always going to come down to a player too. So that's where, Spencer, I just like that Utah does have some of their biggest games down the stretch. I know it risks them being banged up, but I feel like they'll be playing. I mean, you covered teams like an Oregon team last year too, and I know they started hot, but that's a lot of new pieces you're still fitting together. That's where
started hot. 13-0 is starting. They actually started cold,
well, that's
and then got hot a little bit. I love that 13-0 is starting hot though. Like, first half of the season, they were playing some good ball, but second half of the season cooled off a bit en route to a Big Ten championship, and then got their teeth kicked in by Ohio State. Sorry, I just found that phrasing to be.
No, then cool. No, that was fair. That's fair to say that. But I do want to know for you, like, where do you look at as the toughest stretch of this schedule? I would probably say it's the last 3 games, but as I said, I'm okay with that. I'd rather have your toughest games be towards the end than the beginning. Maybe you have the time to recover from that loss, but I feel like you'll be playing from in terms of we will be playing our best ball late in November, as I feel like this Utah team does. That's where it's an advantage.
I agree with that. I don't agree that that's the toughest stretch. I think your toughest stretch is at West Virginia, host Arizona State, at BYU. Now, you have a bye mixed in there between West Virginia and Arizona State, so at home off a bye lessens that blow. But let's not forget, that's the reigning Big 12 champion Arizona State Sun Devils to you and me and everybody else who are returning a lot, including their coaching staff and their quarterback. And they don't have Cameron Scadaboo, but they have a lot of really good pieces. They have done well in the portal. Right now, at least the last time I checked, according to our friends at FanDuel, they are tied with Kansas State for the best odds to win the Big 12 championship this year. So I think that they are, along with Kansas State, the best team on paper that you face, along with Texas Tech. And this is where the benefit of this schedule comes into play for Utah. I stand by what I said earlier, that it's tough, and I don't know that they can navigate this to get back to the Big 12 championship game. But the 3 best teams you've got on paper here in the Big 12 are, in no particular order, Arizona State, Kansas State, and Texas Tech. And Tech could be really good next year. They've had an awesome top 5 portal class this offseason with Baron Morton coming back, Joey McGuire another year. Hopefully they're going to be able to reload for their own sake on the defensive side of the ball, because it was atrocious last year. But they still found a way to be an 8-4 team in the regular season. All 3 of those games are at home. That's a significant break. BYU on the road, that hurts. Baylor, Kansas, I'd rather play them on the road than Kansas State or Arizona State. So I think that stretch of at West Virginia, host Arizona State, at BYU, and frankly, tossed in the Texas Tech as well. I think the beginning of Big 12 play is tougher for Utah than the back half is, because Cincinnati is okay. Baylor might have just been kind of a late flash in the pan. I don't know if they're super sustainable going into next season. Kansas State is really good. Kansas has got a really low floor, but maybe a high ceiling, potentially. But after the BYU game, I feel like the Utes are winning 3 of those games minimum of their final 5 down the stretch, and I would not be surprised if it was 4.
Yeah, it's a tough go. I mean, for them to finish the season 3-0 and for them to start the season 4-0 in conference play would be really impressive.
Oh, if they start the season 4-0 and they're going to be 3-0 in their non-conference, and sure. I feel pretty good saying that. But if they were to start 4-0 with Texas Tech at West Virginia, Arizona State at BYU, catapults them to the top 10 immediately. Immediately. Yeah. Because that's as brutal of a stretch of Big 12 football as you can find.
Mm-hmm. The opponents are there for if Utah wants to bounce back and get into the college football playoff. They should have the resume, assuming their opponents keep up their end of the bargain. But Utah will also have to keep up their end of the bargain.
But you have to be 11-1 or be 10-2, get to the conference title game and win, as we saw this past year. 10-2 BYU didn't even get half a discussion compared to what they deserved.